The hidden disaster, which is all about sanitation tonight. As always, our interest is in self-reliance, and the bottom line is this: either you and I will make provisions for the future, and if we do, we don't have to be a victim, but if you don't make preparations, you'll be a victim. So since it's our choice, then each one of us can just choose what we would want to do. And I always tell somebody, if you choose to be a victim, please don't worry about it. Enjoy your victimhood, because after all, that's what you wanted. Of course, I'm a little rude, and that makes people unhappy, and I apologize for that, maybe. Living providently is based on principles, and it's all about understanding how and why things work, what the reality is. The truth about life is this: there is no doubt that tomorrow will come. There is no dispute that things happen, but how you meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure, and I believe that we should have adventures rather than tragedies and disasters and misery and suffering. True preparedness is based on principles, as already pointed out, and by that I mean, you see, it's not just a list of things that you would buy and a bunch of stuff you get and you store it away and you put it in the basement trunk of the car and those kinds of things. Because what you know, what's inside of you, what's in your head, what's in your heart, what's at your fingertips that you can do with your skills is far more important than the stuff that you have. Now, you want to have stuff, obviously, but if you have stuff and you don't have the other things, well, you've got a problem. When we talk about preparedness, and here are some of these principles that I'm talking about. Now, there's more than 8 of them. These are the ones I talk about the most commonly in classes. We don't have time to go into them here because they're published elsewhere. One of them, to identify for people that may be brand new, is the law of provident living. This is the fundamental principle, I believe, and it's in this order: spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and stuff, and it has to be in that direction down. If you have stuff and you don't have an attitude to make it, what's the point of having stuff? If you have a bunch of stuff but you didn't get the right stuff because you didn't know what to do, or you have the right stuff but you don't know how to use it, I think you get the picture. That's the reason that law is fundamental. Law of stewardship is simply this: this is about life, and by the way, these principles are about life, not just preparedness. Number 1, since you're alive, you have the authority to act. Number 2, you have the responsibility to act properly. Number 3, you are accountable for everything you do and do not do. And that's why we talk about preparedness is very much like a parachute, kind of follows right after that. You see, you have to have a parachute before you need it, and it better be a good one, and you know how to use it. But instead of falling out of a plane, we're now talking about being properly prepared to deal with emergencies. And in this case, it's your attitude, your knowledge, your skills, the supplies and things that you have, because the disaster has no responsibility for your well-being. Just like a parachute has no responsibility for your well-being if you jump out of a plane, or gravity doesn't have any responsibility, it's all yours. So those are some of those fundamental little principles. We talk about the 9 areas. I like to think of them like each one of them being a parachute. They're also modules because they kind of have a synergism within themselves, but you have to have all 9 of them ultimately. The foundation, which is about principles: clothing, water, sanitation, nutrition, shelter, wellness, tools, and supplies. Now, to learn more about these and other important principles, you can go to this class, Prepare to Survive No Matter What, which is about developing you. That's the foundation class 1001. That is free online at safeharboralliance.com. You can also get this DVD that is the first one that I had published years ago. The principles haven't changed. That's a 2-hour DVD that's available through Safe Harbor Alliance. We sell it very inexpensively because we want people to have that as a beginning point. Well, tonight we're talking about sanitation, so we'll dig right into that. This idea of sanitation, and it's really for your health's sake is what it comes down to. Because without proper practices in this area, failed sanitation causes sickness, disease, suffering, and death. These things will run rampant. That's the problem. So when we take a look at kind of the sanitation things, the way we live, this is kind of how it is for most Americans. In fact, many people in the developed world. You put everything in the trash can, you haul it to the street, and somebody picks it up, and you flip the lever on the porcelain throne, and just all this stuff disappears, is taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. Well, where does this class that we're talking about, sanitation, fit in to the overall curriculum? You know, my interest and the focus and interest of this company is to reach out to people and teach them, to reach as many people as have an interest. about many different topics. Of course, in this case, we're talking about sanitation and some of the deadly ramifications when it fails. There's a whole series of classes, and we have been going through these, and we'll be going through more of them. If we look right at the sanitation section, that blue arrow points to the class we're talking about here and now. You can kind of graph out part of these, and they flow into each other. They build upon each other. Within these classes and this whole series of them, you'll be able to take them both online as well as they'll be published in DVD, and we're working on manuals to go with them also, so that it's not about memorizing this stuff, but it's about understanding the principles and know how they fit together and having reference material to go back to, and then you can do whatever you need to do is the bottom line. Well, here's some of these vital, basic sanitation topics that we will be touching on in this class. Since we're going to be looking at the whole sanitation area, can't spend a whole lot of time in many of them. The first part of it I will delve into fairly deeply in case nobody ever goes any further than this sanitation class online where it'll be published. I want them to get those basics. But we will talk about each one of these, and then there's some extended sanitation topics in other classes that we will mention briefly also, because I'd like you to understand how vital this topic is, and it's bigger than what a lot of people think that it is. It's approachable, and it's, it can solve every problem that exists in it, but you have to recognize there is an issue, and then you can take care of them. Well, this is a hidden disaster that very few people recognize, respect, and in some cases have done very much about, simply because we haven't had to. And unless you're forced to do things or recognize it, you just don't take action. So why is sanitation so important? Well, it's so important in part because people just don't recognize how critically important it is, and the ramifications of failed sanitation are literally deadly. If we want to put it into perspective, we might look at it this way. First off, you recognize that the health and life expectancy in the past 100 years or so has dramatically increased. And it's very interesting to look at that. And very often people give credit to the medical community and to antibiotics and medical procedures and surgeries and those things, and they certainly help. But in reality, most of the credit, nearly all of the credit, initially goes to greatly improved sanitation. And you can read all about that in the lives of people who were at the end of the 1800s were pushing for changes, recognizing what the problem was. It wasn't until in the early 1900s that people started to really catch on, and that's when you saw dramatic decreases in typhoid and cholera, in infant mortality that ran so high up until about 1920, and then it plummeted very rapidly. It's interesting to look at that. And it was all about sanitation. It wasn't anything about antibiotics or other things. It was just about getting things cleaned up. So sanitation is vitally important. And the bottom line is this: where sanitation is poor, death and disease run rampant. It used to be that way in this country. It's still that way in other countries. Back in dark ages or wherever you want to look, when people did not understand and when they weren't obeying the rules because they didn't know them, there was a lot of sickness, death, and disease going on. Gratefully, in the U.S., we're very inexperienced with sanitation breakdown, where we have our system that fails to function and take care of us. Now, that's a nice thing on the one hand, but the other flip side of that is when we have a failure, should we have one, should it be a massive failure, it's going to catch an awful lot of people off guard because we simply haven't had to deal with it, haven't thought about it, haven't made preparations for it, hence the purpose of the class. Now, we can take a look at sanitation in the two big areas that are critically important, two key areas that it encompasses. One is being sure, 100% sure, absolutely sure that you have the ability to keep you and your environment around you clean. It's about keeping yourself clean and everything that touches you and everything you come in contact with. The other part of it is having an ample amounts of safe water for both sanitation, because we use a lot of water in sanitation, but also for consumption. Water is a critical component. And so you ask, well, how does water get into this equation? Well, look at it very simply. The leading cause of death on planet Earth is dysentery. Dysentery is uncontrolled diarrhea. And that can be fatal to people within hours, people who are under a lot of stress, infants, elderly people, people who are already a little bit sick with something else. you can die in just a matter of a few hours, or maybe it only takes a couple of days, but the end result is still the same. Dysentery is devastating to the body if you can't control it, and in emergencies where you don't have health services, can't get an IV plugged into you, because the problem is it causes dehydration and it throws your electrolytes out of balance, and that's why you can die very quickly. And where does it come from? From one simple place, most of it is from contaminated water. So when we're talking about sanitation, in some respects, we're actually talking about water and having sanitary water. Now, this is not the water class. We did that last week, and refer back to that one for the basic information there. So having an adequate supply of sanitary water is vital for your health, for your well-being, for you and your family and people around you. So this is something you've got to pay attention to at the same time as a part of sanitation. If you get the water and sanitation, link, and they're not taken care of when there's been a disaster, you simply die. You get sick and die. Well, you can learn about this in the water class that is online. That's 3001, have enough safe water daily, or you'll suffer and die sooner rather than later. There's also the beginning water class series, 3101, Water, the Liquid of Life, and what you must do about it. Now, during emergencies and disasters, things break down around us. And what we're talking about is our infrastructure that brings all these wonderful services of water, sewer, electricity, and then we have many of them. It's communications, it's transportation, waste collection, insect, vermin control, our medical services. All of these things are a part of this infrastructure that gives us a wonderful lifestyle. And when things break around us, these things may in fact be lost. During disasters, people can break down. And when you have a very serious breakdown in the services and the community, what happens is you're under a lot of physical stress. There's emotional stress. You're also dealing with lack of proper rest. You can't sleep well. You're having to work very hard to take care of things. You have poor and inadequate nutrition. And then in the environment, it's just overloaded with all kinds of bacteria and viruses and parasites and things that are out there waiting to get at you. And when you're under stress and these various areas aren't resting well, getting good nutrition, your immune system just simply collapses. And it can take people out in a hurry. We have different ways of spreading these illnesses around. We call them vectors. They're all kind of tied together and interrelated. If you look at the list, it is people and things and soil and air and water, surfaces, clothing, anything you come in contact with, along with insects and animals that can spread. And the real concern is to stop the rampant spread of some of these really nasty maladies that can affect people. And the big killers are cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. Hundreds of millions of people through the generations have lost their lives to cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. Cholera probably being at the very top of the list. If you take a look at what's going on in Haiti, we don't have time to study it here, but you might want to look that up. We had that terrible incident that occurred 2 years ago, and we have an absolute sanitation catastrophe that has been going on, and some of the reports that have been coming out of there are just very, very unfortunate. It's because of a highly contaminated environment. So you see today a minor injury or sickness is just not an issue because, well, we're under normal physical stress, even though we may be working hard and a very fast-paced life, yet it's normal. We're dealing with those things. We're under normal emotional kinds of stresses. We have a functioning sanitation system that's keeping things cleaned up around us, and we also have a healthcare system so that when you do get ill, you can do something about it. But during a disaster, when things have really come undone, and when stress is high, when this system is down, and when the environment is contaminated, then minor injuries or sickness, just catching a cold, a minor flu, these things can become deadly because the body is just overloaded. So we're really talking about prevention. That's the vital thing that we have to do. Now, when things really break down, you have to understand that the solution will be up to you. It has to be up to you. We hope somebody will come. In fact, we hope that these different relief organizations would come. We can think of them as being the cavalry, the guys on the horses with the blue coats, the bugles, and the flag. We hope they're coming over the hill to save our heinies, but they might be in the same predicament that you and I are. They may be so overloaded that they're working to get to you, but it might be days, weeks, before they can get there. So the actions that you do now in your preparation, both in your thinking, your training, your attitude, your supplies, will really determine the outcome. So preparation, once again, is vital. Now, when we take a look at sanitation, and sometimes people, when I talk about things very bluntly, and they'll say, boy, this is just about a bunch of nasty things happening and gloom and doom. Well, I do look at the worst case scenarios. If you remember my statement, if you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it'll be an adventure. So let's figure out what the worst is. And let's be prepared to deal with it, and then hopefully it doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen, life is easy. If it does happen, you're prepared to deal with it. So could we lose all of these municipal services that we are actually quite dependent on? We have this infrastructure that for most people, that's where their well-being comes from, all these things around them. It's all of these services, the water, the power, the sewer, the communication, the garbage collection, the vermin suppression that's going on out there, and many other little things we don't think about. Those things are just kind of automatic. It's what we pay our taxes for. That's what people are hired to do. That's why we pay our utility bills. So if we take a look at this critical infrastructure, in fact, we'll just focus on these four: power, water, communication, and then sewage collection. For people that live in cities that may be on municipal systems. Now, if you're not on a municipal system for sewage collection, if you're on municipal water, you have the same problem because you lose water, you can't flush your toilet and run things down the drain. So these things link together for most people. Well, if everybody had to shelter in place, we don't have to destroy the infrastructure. All we'd have to do is have people need to stay inside because of a very severe pandemic, some kind of a nuclear event, civil unrest, breakdown in society, where for whatever reason it's not safe to go out and go to work. So what happens is we have infrastructure failure that's caused by little problems, tiny little things. Need to oil something, flip a switch, change a light bulb, monitor something and adjust a parameter on a pump, on a valve, a temperature, any number of those things. So these minor little problems, they begin to cascade because you have loss of maintenance workers to take care of it, and you don't have your operating personnel to be there. There's a lot of automation that's in our systems. Many of them will run automatically for, hours, days, maybe even a week or two in some cases. But then as one problem cascades into another one, these things can shut down. And there we are, without this infrastructure and all these wonderful services that make our life so easy and wonderful. Well, I'll make a statement that some people have a hard time getting their head around, but I hope you'll understand why this is true as you go through this class and other classes we do. I simply say that the people of Haiti, these people that went through this terrible earthquake just about 2 years ago now, they were better prepared to deal with that level of event than our own people are. And should the U.S. have a Haiti level of event, that the death and disease will be worse for us than it has been for them. And that's like, but we have all these wonderful things. We have all this, we're so wealthy. We have so many things. And we usually can respond to some of these disasters when they're isolated. We respond very well. But I'm talking about a Haiti level that does that percentage of damage to infrastructure, to economy, to the people, all of those kinds of things. If you have that level of damage to this country, it'll be worse for us than them. And let me just explain it in a very simple way. It's not so much the physical side of it that's a problem. Think about the people of Haiti. It's a very poor country. They were living just barely above, if you will, the poverty level, barely above the subsistence level. That's where so many of those people were. They've been doing that for generations. Their attitude, their acceptance of it is kind of like, this is life, we deal with it. So they're living, just about at ground zero. They're just barely above ground zero. And when that fall came, they didn't have very far to fall. Think about us. Where do we live? Comparatively, we're in the stratosphere. I mean, we're beyond anything those people can imagine. And should that level of fall come and we collapse all the way to zero, then there's many people that will just say it's not worth living because they feel entitled to these things. Well, another lecture for another time, but if you would understand, if you haven't made mental, emotional, attitude, remember that, the law of provident living, spiritual attitude, knowledge, and then stuff. if your attitude isn't right to deal with this and simply say, look, life happens, this is tough, I don't like it, but you know what? I choose to live. I'll do whatever it takes. If you don't have that kind of an attitude, you're just going to wait for somebody to come rescue you, and if they don't show up, you simply don't make it. So that's why I make that statement and why it's very important for us to recognize these things and deal with it. So sanitation is the hidden disaster. It's right in front of us, but we don't recognize it because of the wonderful lifestyle that we have. And it can cause more misery, death, suffering, disease than the event itself. And this is a lot of what's going on in Haiti right now. A lot of people lost their lives in the event. But the ongoing suffering and the ongoing disease, we have 10% of that population is infected with cholera. About 20% of that, of the million people that are infected, they have 10 million people in Haiti. 1 million of them are infected with cholera. About 80% of them, 800,000 of those people, are subclinical, meaning they're not sick, they're carriers, but they're spreaders is what's happening. You have another 200,000 people who are clinical sick, and of course there have been quite a few thousand people have died already from it, and there will be more that will yet die. The problem is you don't clean that up in a year or two or three or a decade. We're talking generations to clean up something that is that bad. Now, we'll start with the worst sanitation issue first. And it's one of the most deadly substances on planet Earth, and it's one of the things that you and I have control over. We can do something about this. Very simply, human waste. Human waste is the big problem. In fact, that's the whole problem with cholera in Haiti and other places around the world. It's about human waste. Now, let's look at the, when you think about human waste, it's kind of like, well, we just don't talk about these things. I mean, that's kind of undiscussable because we're this genteel, sophisticated, society, and you put things at the curb and you flip the lever and you don't have to deal with it. That's one of my, you watch the program Dirty Jobs. Well, somebody has a dirty job that's taking care of your dirty stuff is what it comes down to. So these things, since they disappear, we take our system for granted. We just don't worry about it. We don't need to talk about it, so we don't. And when I do, large classes of people, it's been kind of fun. I did one just a couple of months ago when we had about 100, almost 200 people in the audience there. And I asked the people there, I said, okay, let's see how many of you have been dealing with this at the root level. By a show of hands, how many of you have sat around the dinner table one night and said, okay, family, tonight we're going to discuss poop? I've had one hand go up one time. In fact, it was in that class where we had almost 200 people. There was one hand that went up and said, yes, we've had a discussion about some of these kinds of things. See, most of us, we just don't, because that's like, well, that's ugly. We don't want to talk about that. My message is very simple. If you wait until it's too late, you've got a problem. So when you look at it, and the kind of the basic thought is this: just get over it and deal with it is the bottom line. Because if you don't, if you fail to do that, if you fail to prepare your household yourself, it can become deadly. When we take a look at the human waste issues, we're going to start with the least hazardous and go to the most hazardous. So the least hazardous is urine. As a matter of fact, it's a resource. In fact, you'll see me refer back to that as a resource here in a little bit. Urine is not a hazardous waste. As a matter of fact, it is a resource. We have garbage, all the biological, the organic things, that we generate from the dinner table and the scraps and those kinds of things that can draw flies and other creatures around us and stink and what have you. But the real one we're talking about, the big one, is the fecal matter, the solid waste that comes out of the human bowel. That is the most deadly substance that you're going to have to be dealing with, particularly during emergencies. All right, our modern disposal systems around us require this infrastructure that makes them work that we were looking at. They have to have the support personnel, electricity, fuel, all of those kinds of things. And modern disposal systems can fail because of physical damage, loss of the energy sources, loss of the people to take care of them, operate and maintain them. So when the system is disrupted, for whatever reason, it makes no difference what disrupted it, it's just not working. Your actions will determine the outcome. One of the things you have to do is think upstream and downstream. It's very important that you do that, particularly when we're talking about sewage, because you're probably downstream from somebody, but you're also probably upstream from somebody. You must take responsibility. And you've got to take responsibility early on, I mean immediately. Now, you know, the water gets shut off, the power gets shut off, somebody digs up a sewer line, they usually let you know there's going to be a problem, can't use it for a day or something like that. We're not talking about that level of emergency. We're talking about something, you know that it's been destroyed, you know the power is gone, you know that the ground is broken up, whatever it is that shut it down and it's not coming back. You've got to take action immediately, because it's not coming back tomorrow or the next day. You could be, you know, weeks, months, even years. And in this process, you also have to think community, because if you do everything right and everybody around you does everything wrong, you're in trouble. We've got to help each other now, and we've got to help each other in the future. And that's a part of the reason why I teach the classes that I teach, wanting to help foster this idea of community, so that they're out helping themselves, their family, people around them, and their neighbors. I consider that I'm not prepared until my neighbors are prepared. Well, my neighbor in any place that anybody would like to listen. So if the system breaks down, well, I even ask people, how many don't have one of those? You don't have one of those? You know, go home. We don't need to talk here anymore. Haven't had anybody leave yet. So when this system breaks down, what are you going to do about it? About this thing that you use all the time that you can no longer use? What are you prepared to do? You see, when that infrastructure is fading away, going away, and simply disappears, what are you prepared to do? Well, people will normally think about things like this. It's the pit latrine, it's the outhouse. After all, Grandma and Grandpa had one, and maybe somebody way out on the farm now still has one of those things. So we think about that. I'm just going to go down and, you know, everybody in the neighborhood, we're just going to go out and dig one of these pit latrines. Well, that's what Haiti's all about. That's the problem with Haiti. It was all about slit trenches and open trenches and pit latrines and those kinds of things. Some people say, well, I've got an RV, a trailer, a fifth wheel, you know, a motor home, and it's got a holding tank in there, 100-gallon holding tank, 50-gallon holding tank. I'll just go use that. Well, if it's a short-term event, you know it's a short-term event, sure, why not? Because now you'll be able to dump that stuff properly. But if you have an event that's taken out the system and it's not coming back, what the heck are you going to do with that 100 gallons of that really yucky stuff? Fortunately, there's people who may, in fact, just go down the side of the road and dump it in the ditch. That's Haiti. We're spreading disease when we do that. You have the chemical toilets and the porta potties, you know, the things that have the blue water in them, and it's kind of like, well, I'll just use one of those. What are you going to do, pickle that stuff? Now that you pickled it, what the heck are you going to do with it? We're not trying to preserve this stuff. We need to properly get rid of it. And then, of course, we just have the bushes, you know, and this is Haiti. This is really what's gone on in Haiti to some degree, and that's the reason they have the cholera problem they have there, is because of all of this human waste that's been spread around by people hitting the bushes, the holding tanks, the pit latrines, the outhouses, those kinds of things. When I talk about bushes, they might be things that are quite remote, and that's not too bad as long as there aren't a lot of people around. If you're very, very remote, the population density is extremely small, you know, like one person per square mile. It's not likely to be too big of an issue. You can very simply take care of things. But relieving yourself in these kinds of bushes, this is absolutely deadly. Here's another bush. It was called the Superdome in New Orleans. When I have time in other classes, we talk a little more in depth about that, but that was a nightmare. There were a lot of nightmares that went on there because people were not prepared. Well, is there any doubt that sanitation is a preparedness parachute? You've got to take care of this, because if you don't, you or people around you get sick, you die. Now, in the area of sanitation, you must have a very real sewer down solution, and one that you know that will work. And I'm going to give you some key concepts on what you can do when the toilet will no longer flush. Now, this takes an hour in itself to cover, so I'll give you the concepts, the principle here, if you will, of what you want to do. There's many different ways of solving it, but these are the principles you must take care of. One of them is keep the urine separate from the fecal matter. Now, this is unusual because we don't do that. It all goes into one pot and we flush it away. But when you can't flush it away and we don't have that infrastructure, it's extremely important that you do everything you can to keep it separate, because you're going to dispose of each one of them by different methods. And as I said earlier, earlier, urine is actually not a waste. It's actually safe, it's easy to work with, and as a matter of fact, it is in fact a very valuable resource that should there be a lot of systems that are broken and not working and not coming back, you're not going to want to waste that stuff because it has great uses. The simplest use, just to give you a hint, is fertilizer. We talk about that in a class I'll mention a little later that's actually called urine. It's a pretty simple title because that's what the class is all about. One of the other things is you're going to have less weight and volume to handle and to deal with. You're going to have less contamination of spill because you don't have this soupy, sloppy mess. And the other advantage of keeping it separate and being able to dispose of it separately is that you'll keep odor down. So there's good reasons to do this, and since it's something safe and easy to handle, there's no reason why you shouldn't do that. Key concept number 2. The bottom line is this: you must have a safe long-term method. A holding tank is not a long-term method. A porta potty is not a long-term method. You have to have a safe long-term method of properly disposing of the fecal matter, that solid waste that comes out of the bowels that's just laced with bacteria, viruses, parasites, all kinds of ugly things that will get you and other people sick. See, fecal matter is in fact very, very dangerous. And you must be prepared in advance. This isn't something you go like, okay, when the time comes, I'll kind of figure it out. Because, you know, you need to, hey, when the body says I got to go, you're going to go. And you've got to handle it properly from the very beginning and not allow it to contaminate your environment now or a few weeks down the road when the stuff is built up. Because if you get this wrong, you and people around you get sick and they can in fact die. Another thing that's important in all of these areas is something you need to practice and know that you can do it. Something that you have to be prepared to do because you've solved the problems. The first time you do things, it might be, well, that was hard to do, that was difficult, or I actually couldn't do it. It's important to have a chance to simply back up and say, okay, I've got to figure a different way. To the emergency, and it's a keeper, you have to do it right from the beginning. Practice is important. Keep from mixing the urine, as we already said, for all of those reasons. And then if you want a hint about what to do, let's just go to a very authoritative source. We'll go to the Bible. We'll go to the Old Testament in Deuteronomy 23:13. There's the instructions right there. As I put it this way, he who made this place knew what the heck he was doing, and he told us exactly what to do. Now you have to do it properly, and particularly where there's a lot of people around. This is what Deuteronomy says: and thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be, when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from the earth, the soil, and the life that's in the soil was created to denature, break that stuff down. We talk about this idea of dust to dust, meaning, okay, when you die and your body goes back into the soil, returns to dust. How about everything that passes through you should be dust to dust? It came out of the soil, it needs to go back into the soil. However, you have to do it properly so that you don't spread disease with that. So you have to know your options, and there's a number of options for you to consider. And you want to learn about them and be sure that you can, in fact, do them. That's covered in depth in these two classes. And the Sanitation Class 4104, Part 1 and Part 2, which is the Hidley Dead and Disaster, the Basic Sanitation series that's presented in 4 parts. In Part 1 and 2, we spend enough time in there that you'll see how you do that. Or the Best Grid Down Toilet Solutions, which is Class 4204. And it's really deciding which of these options are best to you. There are some of them that would be the absolute best, but if it's something that doesn't fit your economic situation, you have to have one that you can afford to do. There can be the absolute best. If you can't afford it, what's the next best? What's the next best? What can I do if I had the best solution, but it was destroyed when my house fell in on it and caught on fire? And now that I've lost what I had, what do I need to do? This is where understanding these principles is so critically important, and that's covered in great depth in Class 4204. Okay, in sanitation, another thing you have to be prepared to do and understand is protecting your home environment, the home itself. And what we're talking about here, and we spend quite a bit of time in some of these other classes on this one, is if you're connected to a municipal sewer system, there is a chance that you can have a flood up into your house when that sewer system is shut down, broken, collapsed pipes, clogged pipes, and people upstream continue to flush. If they have water, they can fill your basement. Not every house is at risk, but you need to know if your house is or is not, and then you must solve that problem and prevent it from occurring, because once you back 4 feet of black water, black, dirty, smelly sewage water into your basement, two things are going to happen. Number one, you're going to have to leave your home. You cannot live there. You cannot stay there. There's no disaster cleanup. There's no pump truck coming. It's in there and it's staying in there until it evaporates away. You can't live there because it'll kill you. And secondly, anything that was in that basement you now abandon. So preventing that from occurring is very high on the prevention list that you must do. In this sanitation area, it's vital to keep things cleaned up around you. Your whole environment, the things that you touch and touch you, you've got to take care of them and not allow them to become contaminated. So here, we're talking about some of the tools, some of the materials, supplies, and things like that you want to have on hand so that you know that you can wash and scrub and mop and clean and sweep up and eliminate garbage. And it includes everything from composting things to burying them to feeding things to animals. And then having things that are plastic and paper, the buckets, the barrels, the mops and the sweepers and those kinds of things. So you want to study that and understand what you have to have there. Another one to understand is the options that you have for cleaners and sanitizers. And there's things that you may want to have now and that you're using now, but when those things are all gone, what do you do? In fact, there's another class that will cover that even in more depth. And one of the things that's very important to understand is there's some things that can be hazardous. If you'll look down on the lower left-hand corner there and you'll see the red circle crossing out, what you have is a chlorine-based product and an ammonia-based product, and it's extremely important you don't store those together, allow them to get mixed together, because they will create clean gas, which is deadly. So it's understanding some of these rules of what you do and do not do, having things that will store a long time. You want to be sure that you've got what it takes. In this protecting your home environment, we're talking also about the pest and vermin control as a part of it. Around you, you have all kinds of critters that can spread disease. And so in sanitation, you must protect yourself from them. Well, it's mice and rats, it's flies, and it's all kinds of things that may be a problem. The biggest one, probably one of the worst ones of all, being mice, and right along with that are flies. So having means to control them, because remember, right now you probably have an automatic system in your area that's taking care of so many of these things, because that's what you pay your taxes for, and that's what you do. When those things go away, you've got a big problem. Well, you can learn about the things we've just talked about here, these three areas, in Sanitation Class 4104, Part 3, or in Sanitation Class 4102, which is protect your home environment, keep things cleaned up. Let's see, I think I have a number. No, that's correct. Yeah, it is 4104, Part 3, and 4102, which is protect your home environment, and it has all of those things in it. In sanitation, there's many facets to personal hygiene, and you must be able to take care of all of those. Excuse me. It is about having soaps and cleaners and things to wash. It's about your clothing and how you scrub and keep them clean, having supplies for that. It's about having some alternative things. And one thing I like to point out to people that you need to understand is that bar soap is not a sanitizer. Bar soap, in fact, can spread disease because it doesn't kill the microbes that are on it. You've just washed your hands and you had something on your hands that's hazardous, some microbe, and it may be left on that bar of soap. You set it aside and you can watch them under the microscope, the bacteria. They eat the fats that are in there, the lipids that it's made from. They just kind of thrive on them. They multiply. Somebody else comes along, picks that bar of soap up and washes with it. Now, if everything gets flushed away, you're okay, but if some of it stays with that person, you've now spread disease to them. So you have to be careful of that. And one of the big ones in this area is, so what are you going to do when all of your rolls look like that? They're all empty. What are your alternatives? What should you be doing to prepare now? It's pretty simple in some respects, but yet I hear a lot of people say, I do some of these, where we have more time in the classes and we start digging into it, and somebody will say, if I can't have toilet paper, I'd rather just die. Well, that's a lousy attitude as far as I'm concerned. So you want to know that you have options, and you have to have the right attitude. Remember back in the very beginning in Provident living, spiritual attitude, knowledge stuff. If you have the knowledge of what the solution is, once you've run out of the stuff you stored, and you have the right attitude, you say, oh, I'll just take care of it and do what I have to do because I have a mission bigger than whether I have toilet paper or not. It all ties right back into that law of Provident living. So we'll give you options in that and some of these other classes where we have time. And another one that's extremely important is being prepared to deal about protecting yourself from becoming infected in a very nasty environment. So you have personal protection kinds of things. Things to keep from being stung by the mosquitoes during the day or at night, not breathing things that would be harmful microbial-wise, keeping your hands clean, not letting things splash on you. So personal protection is a sanitation issue. These that we just talked about, Sanitation Class 4104, Part 4, or Sanitation Class 4103, it's about personal hygiene. And it is about looking better, feeling better, but it's literally about being better. It's about not getting sick. Now, as we get into this extended area, I already mentioned this one, sanitation, about urine. It is a very valuable resource that you don't want to just be throwing away. And what I tell people now is don't flush it, learn to use it, learn to do it now. By the way, I don't think somebody has a right to talk about something you don't do. My wife will always point out this is a little too much information, but in that upper right-hand corner picture right there, that's my very simple, low-cost, nearly free urine collection device. So that you see in that picture on the left right there, kind of the analysis. Now, there's about 142 different compounds and chemicals and things that are in urine. Most of them are very useful. They will break down in the soil. The soil would love to have the phosphorus and the potassium. It very much wants that. And the nitrogen that's in the urea. You see at the very bottom down there, urea. That's what commercial fertilizers are made from. When you buy a commercial fertilizer, it's urea, which is a nitrogen compound that breaks down in the soil to give nitrogen that'll feed the plants, because the plants need to have it converted into the form by the bacteria can use it. So it's a resource. By the way, there's a bunch of other uses for it we talk about in the sanitation class, but I would say that 99% of why you want to keep it and use it right now is to build your soil dust to dust. If you're going to be eating out of your garden, you better be putting things back into it. Okay, so you can find out about that in Sanitation Class 42.1, urine. A most valuable and overlooked resource. Please consider that, because there may be a time that will be an extremely important thing to do. Practice now. Sanitation, another area is you need to have some formulas and some practices that you can use for some homemade cleaners. Well, as a part of this, the first thing you would like to have, of course, are things that are very shelf-stable and can be stored for a long period of time, so you can set them aside. But eventually, stored things will run out. You'll notice that the liquid chlorine bleaches that's crossed out down there, they don't store very well for very long. They weaken quickly. You can store some of these sanitizers in another form as a dry bleach. It's a different compound, dry chlorine bleach. And there's other ammonia-type compounds you can get. So you want to store them that will last a long time. But you need to have alternatives, because those little critters that are going to be around, particularly in a contaminated environment, you ingest them, they get you sick. And if you are in a lot of stress and you don't have the medical services to take care of you, salmonella, E. coli, these become deadly very, very quickly. Well, there's other options, things that you may want to be storing for other reasons too. If you know how to use them properly, they will help take care of that issue. It's both in the practice of sanitation, but it's also in knowing other things that you can use to keep things cleaned and disinfected. So in Sanitation Class 4202, it's about homemade cleaners, these formulas and practices for when the stores are empty and there's no more coming. Another sanitation issue that you want to go into in depth is the wash day. This is some of the things you can do. How do you wash your clothes when the utilities are out? Well, it's pretty simple in some respects, but a lot of people haven't done it. And there's things that will help you conserve water and conserve your resources. And you better be sure that you have all the right tools and you're prepared to deal with it. So in our class, which is Grid Down Wash Day 4203, It'll be about doing the wash when the utilities are all gone. When I say all gone, I mean the water's not there, water's hard to get, it's expensive in energy because maybe you have to haul that stuff for half a mile. Maybe you're collecting it off your roof. How do you know that that water is safe for sanitation reasons? Different things. So doing the wash when your utilities are gone, no electricity, no water, no sewer. Another one to consider is these best grid down toilet options. We already talked briefly about that. You need to know what they are. You need to know which ones are going to work best for you, which ones you can afford, which ones you might be planning for in the future, and what would you do tomorrow. Suppose you're going to put in one of those systems, a composting system, or you're in a place where you could put in a backup buried septic system. But you're going to do that next week, and suppose the event occurs tomorrow. What would you do immediately? How can you be prepared to take care of yourself immediately? So you've got to have this strategy in mind and be getting prepared now. So that's Class 4204, the best grid down toilet solutions, and discovering which options are best for you now and in the future. Another one that people don't like to think about, but this does occur, and that's living in conditions where there's extreme contamination because of breakdown in both the systems and how things have become contaminated. You know, these things can and do happen. They happen every year. They may not have happened to you yet, but they could someday. And what happens is when things become highly contaminated like that, for all the reasons we've discussed, they become deadly. You need to be prepared so that you can not find yourself at the losing end of that contamination. So dealing with extreme contamination, and this is strategies for worst case conditions. Not because we want worst case to come, but here again, if you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it'll be an adventure. Sanitation Class 4401. And then community sanitation options, you know, when you've had a major disaster, huge breakdown, kind of ties in with some of these other classes, but now we're talking about strategies and how you can organize a community and think as a community. And one of the most important things about getting prepared is not doing it as a lone wolf. Lone wolf does not live very long when it gets bad. You have to have community. Sanitation will be a part of that community. Because you see, we can work together to stay well together, or if we don't work together, we can all die together, be sick together is what it comes down to. So you have to be planning for those things, being prepared for it, and helping other people around you grasp. Now here's the issue. Is everybody going to get it? Is everybody involved? Of course they don't. But if you have a small group of people, a core, if you will, who are prepared, and when things are really broken, when it's really tough, and people are looking for answers, they didn't want to learn about them now, but they're going to be hungry for answers because they're going to figure out it's a big problem. So you need to be prepared with those things. Sanitation Class 42, which is community sanitation strategies post-major disasters. And that is keeping a bad situation from becoming a Haiti event. We talk about Haiti, not to pick on Haiti because my heart goes out to those people and what occurred there, but it is a case study in how bad things can go, and we need to be prepared to deal with them. Another one is understanding the sanitation issues that are in all of the 9 modules. We focus right in on the sanitation class, but each one of these others has its own little set of sanitation nuances that will feed into the whole. So we take a look at each one of these 9 modules and look at sanitation that's tied within them. Now, some of them have a lot in there, others don't have as much, but you deal with them. So here we're talking about Class 4301, which is sanitation issue practices within all the modules. And these sanitation needs are ubiquitous. In fact, all of these 9 areas actually link in and tie to each other. This one, how water is throughout it. We haven't talked a lot about water here, but you get the impression that water is throughout. So when we take a look at sanitation preparedness, it encompasses these 2 key areas. One is having enough water, ample amounts of water, of safe water, sanitary water, that's clean enough for sanitation. It may not be clean enough for drinking, but it can be clean enough for sanitation. And then having ample amounts of water for consumption. That's to drink or to use in your food preparation. You've got to have the water. It's important. And then you must be 100% sure that you have the tools, the experience, the knowledge, the understanding, the practice to keep you and your environment clean. Because if you don't get on top of this quickly, once you get the disease and pestilence cycle started, it's hard to turn off. That is the issue with Haiti when we're talking community. I mentioned earlier that cholera issue and the death and sickness and pain and misery it's going to cause is not going to get cleaned up next year or the next year. It's not going to get cleaned up next day. This will continue for generations when you really understand how that disease works. Okay, back to our sanitation classes. I've given you a touch on some of them. At the front end of this, we talked a great deal about the problem of sanitation, this whole series of classes and how they all link and tie together. And I would encourage you to study in depth what goes on in sanitation, both from us but from others. One of the reasons I do a lot in the sanitation area is I have all kinds of preparedness books. They don't say much. They'll teach you how to dig a pit latrine. Okay, maybe that'll work in some cases. They're going to tell you to store some soap and some toilet paper. But as you've seen all the areas that we've talked about here, there's a lot more to say. What you're going to find covered in any book that I've ever found so far. Loss of infrastructure, the failure that can take out the sanitation and all the rest of them is not going to be a real hazard for you if you can keep things sanitary. If you have safe water for cleaning, if you have properly disposed of human waste and know how to do that, if you have stored safe drinking water so that you can bridge the time between when a disaster has occurred and then if you can purify the water that's around you that will be contaminated. Every ounce of water on the surface in particular will be highly contaminated. Rivers and streams, rainwater, all these things can be contaminated. Artesian wells, deep artesian wells, and springs are likely to be safe, but you need to know that they are safe. The question is always at the end, will you live providently? You see, the choice is yours, and by making proper provisions in all areas of your life, you would be able to face the future with hope, with a confidence that says, you know what, I can deal with these things. It's not about wanting them to happen or even being macho about them. It just simply is a quiet confidence that says, okay, I've studied, I've learned, I've practiced, I've set things aside, I know what to do, I can take care of the issues, so I will. And it's about being able to look at this issue of life and simply saying, you know, I'm going to allow it to occur because I can't stop it from occurring. I'm going to keep myself out of trouble every way that I possibly can. But when things show up, when it comes at you, catches you off guard, and but you know that you've been prepared to deal with the worst situations, then you turn something that most people would be greatly disturbed about, you can simply turn that into an adventure rather than bemoaning how terrible your life is. True preparedness is based on principles. It's not just a list of things to buy and a bunch of stuff that you're going to tuck away. And that's what I've been talking about here, giving you an overview of these things, because what you know, what you're prepared to do with that knowledge, the skill that you have, the practice you have, and then the material things that you have or you can find or scrounge, that's what will make all the difference in the world. So please consider that preparedness is a lifestyle. It's not about something you just stick in the basement or put in a kit in the trunk of your car, but it's literally about a lifestyle that I like to call provident living. That's the law of provident living. What's the law of provident living? Law of provident living, very simply, is the key words are spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and then stuff. When you put it in that order and properly work in each one of those things and keep developing, you can live in a way that allows the future to come no matter what. So you try things, you test them. I talk about playing with preparedness things. This isn't something that you have to do. This is something you have the opportunity to do so that you can face the future because of your experience and your experiments and your playing and your trying. It's a part of your lifestyle, and you do it for positive reasons, not because you're afraid of the future. You're doing it so that you can enjoy the future. So, you know, I do weird things. I encourage you to do, they don't have to be all that weird, but you need to practice the things that will allow you to get through. Well, this concludes our sanitation class 4001, The Hidden Disaster. To give you an overview and an idea that failed sanitation will catch and kill the ignorant. This DVD that I mentioned earlier, there's a companion DVD on principles. It's called Foundation. If you don't have that, I would encourage you to get that. We sell them inexpensively. But no matter what you decide to do, the ball is in your court, because we're doing all that we can do to bring information and training to you in live classes and online classes, published in DVDs, manuals, and through different medias as we can. So every week we will be here Wednesday nights live at Cabela's in Lehi, Utah, or you can attend online. Register for the newsletter at safeharboralliance.com. It'll bring you both links, and it will keep you apprised of the dates. Tuesday nights I do an audio broadcast that you can link to and listen to, and all of the classes that we do online will be recorded. Some of them will be available to all people all the time. Others will be available to our members that join Safe Harbor. They'll have unlimited access. Well, I will open up the chat room now, and if people have questions, I can see them from online, and anybody in our live audience here, you can ask them. I'll be glad to answer them. Yes?
Toilet, separate the urine off. If you're using your toilet, what's
Well, I can give you a thumbnail sketch of it here. We go through, it takes about an hour to do everything in the detail that I'd like to do. But the bottom line is, you remember what it said in Deuteronomy. It needs to be in the soil, safely tucked away, buried deep enough in the soil where it's protected, and the worms, the nematodes, the bacteria, the fungi, all those things in the soil will break it down, will destroy the disease-causing mechanisms over time, and turn it back into humus in the soil. So getting it buried. If you're still at home, you can, using your toilet, which is I talk about converting it into a dry system where you have a plastic bag in it, and the key words I talk about are separate, cover, carry, and bury. Separate as in the urine, so it's not wet in there. Cover as in we'll put some dry matter over it, sawdust, peat moss, dried leaves, finely chopped up straw, dirt, I don't care, just something, because you want to cover it in there, because I don't want to have to take out a bag every time I use it, because then I have to have too many bags. I want to use them multiple times. So we cover it, and then we also cover the bowl with a piece of cardboard, put the lid down, the seat down, the lid down, and out of it. Then when it comes time, when that bag is full, you carry it outside so that you can get it into the soil, which means you have to have the tools, dig a hole. It needs to be deep enough. And we'll just kind of layer it up in there. We're going to use that hole multiple times. Where to put it is important so it can't erode, where you can watch it, keeping animals out of it, things like that. Allow it to break down. In the plastic bag you've collected in, you don't want it back either. It goes in the hole. But you don't drop the bag in there. You don't put a twist tie on the bag and drop it in the hole. It has to be dumped out in the hole so that it's in contact with the soil, because if it's not in contact with the soil, it'll stay in that bag for a long time. Somebody's going to dig up that bag. You don't want to know what's in the bag. We want that stuff to break down, and it will do that over time. So that's kind of what you do to get it outside. If you want a portable system, you can do it with a bucket and a seat. You have other options, of course, which are composting toilets as a right, build or buy one. Then you can also consider using a septic system. As long as you're in a rural area, you might be on a municipal system, you could go back. So there's the sawdust toilet. There's a lot of different things you can consider using. But it is about properly handling that stuff from the very beginning and getting it in the soil, not in water, not in the air, but in the soil, in the ground, where it can be digested and broken down.
Hole dug, and you got this full bag.
Okay, you've got this bag. How do you get it out of the bag? Well, you lay the bag on the side of the hole. I have pictures of this in the class where we cover that. Just lay it on the side of it, grab it by the bottom, and just dump it in there. So you pour the contents out into the hole and then drop the bag in on top of it. Everything being open, because I want the life in the soil to get into that stuff and work on it. So just dump it in there. Have yourself a great evening. We'll see you next Wednesday. This is Jim Phillips wishing the best for you. Have a great evening and good night.